our topic, which is titled Evaluation of Spiritual Christianity. He goes by the name of Reverend Akhona Masiza. He was born and raised in Soweto, Dobsonville. He is the firstborn of 3 children to his parents. He is a Christian and a Wesleyan at heart, raised and nurtured in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. He's an active member of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, stationed in the Natal West District at the Port Shepstone Circuit 808. Rev Masiza has done extensive work in the Methodist Children and Youth Unit, having dedicated his early life to the service of servant leadership in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, with a special focus around children and youth. He was a district secretary for 2 terms. He was involved in campus ministry, Methodist Student Society. His love for music expressed through the Music Association, with a particular interest around worship and liturgy. Through study, Rev Masiza has mounting interest in the study of church history and biblical studies, Old Testament, and he has taken a stand in the discourse pertaining liberation humanist ideologies such as feminism and African studies. He holds an honors theology degree from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in the stream of church history, history of Christianity. Rev Masiza loves Jesus, people, and life, and nothing has come along that could diminish his love for Ikusheshe. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our speaker for today, Rev Masiza. Over to you, Mfundisi.
Thank you very much to our anchor, Brother Mandiluve. Would you just indicate to me if I'm audible enough before I go any further?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you very much. I offer my warm greetings and heartfelt appreciation to the Connectional MCYU coordinator, the executive team, and all those who call themselves Methodists and friends to the Methodist Church, and the mighty, powerful, and fulfilling name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Good evening, everyone. Let me appreciate that resounding introduction by Mandiluve. For a moment, I had to pinch myself to check if I'm still alive. Thank you for that. Friends, without wasting time today, we are going to dive into the evolution of Christian spirituality, particularly within the context of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. That is what I've decided to focus on, following the given mandate by the executive. We are going to attempt exploring how our worship practices have developed from the foundations of Methodism, while also we draw some parallels with other Christian movements, particularly the African independent churches. So we'll take a short journey. It won't be long because of time, from traditional worship to contemporary models of worship, with hope that we will see and trace how these together have shaped our theological and cultural context. And so throughout this conversation, we'll be reflecting, or rather using lenses, which we should all by now, I want to assume, and if I'm wrong, please forgive me, what is known as the Wesleyan quadrilateral, which speaks about our tradition's unique way of understanding scripture, reason, experience, and tradition. So at the back of our mind, without me explicitly mentioning those, we should constantly keep those lenses close to what I'm going to share with you. Firstly, let me just give a disclaimer here. The coordinator happens to be a very good friend of mine, and his team have been very naughty in picking this topic. I mean, evolution of Christian spirituality in the modern age. In simple terms, what is the problem here? I had to sit and think, what am I supposed to say here? This topic essentially is trying to address how Christian worship and spirituality, particularly in the Methodist Church, has or has not changed over time, either to stay relevant, especially in light of young people leaving the church and for other congregations. So it aims somehow to explore how the church can adapt its day-to-day practices to then better connect with today's congregation while honoring the traditions and our cultural diversity. So I hope with that kind of simplified, I know it's kind of long, we are able to see where we are going with this topic. There are big words, like I've said here, that have been used. Let us just attempt to break them down in a second. There's been a term of evolution. And in this context, I want to assume that it refers to a gradual kind of transformation, but not just transformation, how we adapt to that kind of a movement as the congregants of this time in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. So I want us to then pack that towards the end, how we then evaluate that evolution. Then we speak of spirituality, which is a keyword number 2, spirituality. And here it has been confined to what is said Christian spirituality. The third term here that has been coined is modern age. So then that term kind of pushes us to really eventually we should talk about the contemporary period, which is marked, please highlight this, by social, political, and cultural changes in a post-colonial South Africa. So everything that is happening around us, when we speak of church, we do not then speak of church within a vacuum. All these somewhat have an influence towards how we then interpret our spirituality. But I could not rest without then dealing with the term spirituality. When we talk about spirituality, we talk about a very broad concept. It encompasses a search of meaning. When you talk about spirituality, searching of meaning, purpose, and connecting with something greater than ourselves. And in our case, we refer to God, that being God, the triune God. And it is often then associated with personal growth, inner peace, and a pursuit of this transcendent experience or understanding of our journey with Jesus Christ. But then it has been narrowed down now, and we have been given this understanding of a Christian spirituality. And I had to then go search what is being referred to when we speak about Christian spirituality. I then had to then use, get a theological perspective. What do theologians say about this? I just had to pick one. One center Schneider speaks of Christianity as an experience of consciously striving to integrate one's life, not of isolation and self-absorption, but of self-transcendence towards the ultimate value of what one perceives. And so Schneider speaks of Christianity as something that is personal and communal. So this is not something that we do alone. And then it then fits perfectly to what then African scholars imagine what spirituality is in our context. When we bring it home, closer to home, that African scholars speak of how spirituality is deeply communal. It is holistic. It integrates both material and spiritual aspects. And so there's an understanding, therefore, that spirituality must include local traditions. It must include things that we know, things that we are familiar to. It must include things that we are able to touch and have a sense of. And hence, when we speak of spirituality in the African context, we can never speak of spirituality without speaking of music, dance, connecting to the soil, touching of the soil, the water, and all those things. So it becomes, then it makes sense of what we are then speaking about. And I want us to pause there for a moment as we take in those definitions. They are quite a lot. And now and again, one has to remind themselves exactly when we speak about spirituality, what are we speaking about? We're talking about an encounter and how we relate to God, which involves beliefs, practices, values, and experiences, and all those shape our relationship with God. So in simple terms, then that is what spirituality is. Then I had to then go back a bit. Now we are trying to trace how this thing has evolved. So we cannot speak of the modern age without having spoken of the historical context where we come from. And I want us for a moment to then set the stage to say Methodism in South Africa is shaped by two key historical forces. One being the missionary efforts of the British Methodist Church. Two, the indigenous responses to those efforts. So as much as the missionaries had brought lento inkolo, but there was a response from the people of Southern Africa. There was a response from the African people to that. So we can never isolate these two whenever we speak about our foundations. And the early Methodism in the 19th century was then heavily influenced with liturgical and sacramental traditions of the Anglican Church, which is marked by structured prayers, hymns, and strong emphasis on preaching. And even John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, saw worship as an opportunity for both personal and communal transformation, as a concept rooted both in scripture and in reason. And so it kind of makes sense that even though it seems as if though this thing was brought to us, new as it is, but not completely foreign to us. However, our reasoning instinct could then connect with this thing, and we could then make sense of what is being said to us. And I mean, I will speak about one, the translation of hymns into local languages and the inclusion of African melodies, where the early adaptations were reflected as a desire of meaningful worship. I mean, even though these things came all the way from England. But eventually, then there are people who attempted to evolve these things. And this is one of the scarcely celebrated and hardly narrated, yet the best things the Abantu people did. Too. You know, Julius Kantongo speaks of the liturgy for Africa versus the liturgy of Africa. I want us to capture that. The people tempted to shift this thing, being a liturgy for Africa, making it a liturgy of Africa. So they carefully transplanted the Christian doctrines and theology captured in our hymnology. One of the critical things was the hymnology, and they then transplanted it into the African soil using the understanding of the Abantu people, Batu. And I mean, I was just looking typically at the Sotho hymnal hymn, you know, and I didn't even go far. I looked at the first hymn, Mpemali Masikiti, and I went to the sixth stanza where it says Batu Bohle Dumelang. You know when someone says to you, you can only find that in African languages. I don't care how hard you are, you can only reason and come to a belief when someone says to you, a definite, unremitting, imploring kind of a please. And so these African people thought the need to then transplant the understanding of spirituality and worship into African spaces. So then Methodism grew in Southern Africa. The church then began to engage more deeply with local context. And I want us to note the word, underline the word engage, which is what I think the coordinator and the team is bringing us. Do we continue to engage these things, or we are quick to just jump ship? But another thing I want us to talk about, which is a second idea to this, is that there's always been indigenous leaders and thinkers within the church that have somehow advocated for worship that resonated with cultural expressions, you know, and these were within the church. They were not outside the church. In as much as the journey was not smooth, you know, there were tensions in the church, and there's always, and even today, there's this constant colonial and Eurocentric thing that is hanging over our heads and which influences our practices. And Undlovu Gacheni speaks of how we have become theoretical fraudsters, whereby we speak about changing the status quo. We are decolonial thinkers, and yet we fail to translate this into the real world action. And I want us to ask ourselves as the question, as young people of the Methodist Church, that in actual fact, in our existence as young people, do we in any way action our thoughts, action our desires, action our understanding of spirituality, and use it as a way of translating it into the real world, which is, in this point, the Methodist Church of Southern Africa? I want us to ask us that question as you continue with this conversation. But another interesting thing here that I picked up from this conversation, around 1989 towards 1991, I was an infant also, so don't be intimidated by this history. Professor Khumalo speaks of how the church was led towards a time of change, where there was a formation of joint services. So this thing is not new, where the segregated languages, so where the whites and the blacks would once in a while have joint services. I think it was the time of the Reverend Peter Story when he was president of conference, right up until Utatu Dandala, when we spoke about journeying into the new land. So those were some of indications that the church wanted to push into a space of diversifying our worship, trying to make sense of our worship, and trying to teach those who are on the other side of the fence. But another aspect that we tend to neglect a lot, and it keeps on manifesting itself in very interesting phases, and I mentioned this before, the influence of African independent churches, the African indigenous churches, Mapostolo, Amazioni, and the charismatic formations. These ones were amazing pioneers in how they constantly somehow wanted to push away from the typical missionary way of understanding worship. You know, they were somehow characterized by vibrant kind of singing, dancing, and the use of African instruments. And those were somehow our role models, even though these things happened within us, but those are the ones who then pushed out of the typical mission way of doing things. And then the question becomes, what can the MCSA learn from the AICs even in this day? And I think the most significant lesson about the integration of local culture into worship, we see this, is that the elements of Christian worship are not separate, but are rather integral to it. So we don't need to separate our understanding of Christianity into something aloof, but we rather integrate our own way of doing, of understanding spirituality and doing worship in the African context. And the last thing I want to talk about here before I give you, so that we get into a conversation here, is language and spirituality, and particularly worship. So I keep on interchanging between worship and spirituality. Language has always been a powerful tool in the history of Christianity, in which how it shapes how people connect with people. And in the MCSA, there's been a significant shift from English only services into multilingual services. And this is not just about inclusivity, but it is a theological statement. You know, we don't just want to stand alone. We don't just want to speak isiXhosa or sikhuluma isiZulu or ribuwe Sesotho Setswana, but there is a theological understanding that language carries meaning, it carries culture, it carries identity, and it allows people to worship in their own tongues, which somehow enables a deeper spiritual and connection. And if we claim that language is a very important thing, then what is the language of the modern day? How has language evolved in the modern day? How do the people in the modern day understand language? And that is one of the questions I want us to grapple about as we get into conversation. But then with all these strides, this has proven that the evolving world often leads to many jumping the ship. So in as much as the church the thinkers attempt to throw in these things, but because the world is ever fast moving, so people always have options, particularly young people. And remember, I said to you at the very beginning, spirituality is a pursuit of transcendent experience and understanding. And so no one stays in something they have no experience of, no understanding of. And as a result, Sigmund Bauman, who's a sociologist, in his discussion, he speaks of liquid modernity. And I want to quote him. He says, in a consumer society, and now I assume that this is us, Christians, in a consumer society, relationships tend to be evaluated by their utility and satisfaction. So loyalty fades quickly when relationships no longer serve personal needs or desires. And for a moment, I want us to take that in, that the church is in trouble because when the church no longer serves personal needs and desires, loyalty fades, and then people are quick to then jump out. And then I had to then consult with other disciplines. How do we then balance this? And I had to then use the discipline of medicine, because even Christianity is a discipline within itself. I had to draw some examples, and I just want to pick on 4, then I give to our anchor to lead us into a time of conversation. In medicine, where treatment must be evaluated and methods are explored, this is what is being said. It says, 1, established spirituality practice needs continuous evaluation. And so we must be a church that is continually evaluating these things. And so the church must not panic. The church must not panic when now and again we grumble about Imibedesh. The church must be excited because its people, its consumers, it wants to evaluate whether does this thing serve us? Is it effective for our times, without its focus being too traditional or too spiritual, and yet it leaves out the realities of our time. And so the church must be static, must be excited when the people want to change these things. When the people say out with the old, new, in with the new. So the church must be excited. And I send this as a challenge to the Mission Congress that is coming to us. Another thing, that there must be a search for new expressions of spirituality, just like in medicine. There must be always a search for new treatments. There must be a search for a continuing spirituality that expresses some newness and practices, where even the seasoned people and the new people can look at this thing and say, we relate to this thing, though it looks old, but somehow we connect with it, though it is somehow not what we are so used to, but it fulfills the hunger within us. And so it becomes the responsibility of the church to do that. And another thing, Christian spirituality must be inherently experimental. Medical practices are experimental. And so there must be a test of new ideas now and again. That is why we send our clergy. That is why we send our clergy to the seminary, so that they learn new ways of doing theology. They learn contemporary ways of doing theology. They learn contemporary ways of preaching. And once they have done that, we allow them the space to come into the congregations that we are used to. And even though we take them as if there's this thing that when you are new in the church, it's as if you've never been in the church. When you are a new minister in a community, it's as if you are just now being born as a minister. You've never been in the church. I don't know if you've experienced that, but because you speak of these new and kind of foreign things, and the church then kind of locks you out. But this suggests that the church must open itself to allowing new theologies to be taught to them, new terminologies to be introduced to them. And finally, then, I then have a question to say to you. Has this been then happening in the Methodist Church? Has this been happening in the Methodist Church? And if yes or no, what is the role of young people in assisting the evolution in the Methodist Church, assisting the Christian spirituality in the Methodist Church? And I want to suggest 4 things. I know I had promised that I'm just going to mention those ones, but I just want to mention 4 things. 1, we need to promote open dialogue and learning. The church is no longer good in learning. The church is excited by noise and loud preaching and lesser of spaces of dialogue, where particularly when we refer to cognitive spaces like class, so the church needs to continue promoting those spaces to say, what do you think about this? When we get into spaces where we think about this. Number 2, the church needs to support theological education. I know that there are arguments that John Wesley was not much of a theologian. Well, we are in a space where we minister to quite reasonably educated people, quite reasoning people who have experience. And so we need to be theologically equipped. And so the church needs to strengthen its intentions in training those who are in theological spaces and in allowing them to do their job when they get to the field. We have this tendency of, I can never go to Checkers and act as a supervisor at Checkers in my clerical way. Then there are often these concepts. I know we misuse the concept of priesthood of believers, but in the church we've become so careless in assigning roles of those who have been taught these things. We have been careless in simply dishing out responsibilities and positions that are supposed to be given to people with expertise in theological practice. And I hope I could see your faces and your reaction with this particular comment. However, I will wait for the questions. And another thing, the church needs to embrace innovation. The church needs to participate in the development of new worship. That we have to see this in various contexts, be it as Lalini, be it a Lokshin, be it in the most urban areas. The church must be able to participate in different models of worship without being turned off. And another thing, we have to continue fostering inclusivity and diversity. The church was very wise, and I want to go back to close by this. When the church started this thing of joint services, that was a beautiful venture of pushing us, bringing us together into one spaces. We should be a church that is able to practice its spirituality without being in isolation of the other. And lastly, the church must be able to engage in research and reflection. The church must be very particular in its spaces of decision making to say, what is our research? What are our thinkers saying about this thing? What are our scholars saying about this thing? And so we in as much as we can all be clergy, in as much we can be all laity with the nice ceremonial positions, but there must be, the church must always have a body of thinkers, researchers that always go to the drawing board and find out, how do we evolve? Are we evolving? And how is the response of the people with the wheels of change? And with that, I know I've said a lot. I just want to pause there and give you an opportunity to engage me with these submissions. Over to you, Mandiluve.
Thank you so much, Mfundisi, for such an amazing and thought-provoking presentation. Friends, I am now going to open for a segment for engagements. If you have any questions, comments, quarrels, or qualms to what Mfundisi has just shared with us, please feel free to raise your hands so that we can engage. I am going to request Brother Ayanda to take questions from people who are watching us from Facebook. May we please have hands, please, to engage.
Whilst we are still waiting for hands or comments on the chat box on the Zoom platform, I think I have about 2 questions. The first one is from Tabang, who's asking about above dialogue. What about embracing digital transformation? The other one, I think it is a rhetoric question and a reaction to what you just said about laity and giving responsibilities to those who have the necessary expertise, from Onel asking Uguti Ukabatina Ngoko. But there are 3 comments. 2 are from Ukosi Masina, that we should promote open dialogue and learning, and that we should embrace innovation that will help to retain our youth. And Uluvo Patela is saying that we have the likes of Rev Kwakaza, a very sober minister. So I think there's only one question as to above dialogue. What about embracing digital transformation?
Do you want me to take that now?
Yes, Rev, because there haven't been any hands.
I'm hoping that I captured that well. One, what Tabang is making us notice that we kind of live in a digital world, and as we are in a digital world, we need to be a church that is able to utilize the resources that the digital space give us, incorporate the digital tools into worship, the multimedia efforts such as videos, digital music, as a way of sending our message across. I know, for instance, COVID-19 had pushed us towards that space, and quite a number of colleagues were forced to exist in that space. However, there's still quite a number who, after COVID-19, they felt that this thing does not really work for us, and yet it is amazing that we had kept the spirituality of the people alive during those spaces. However, the danger with these digital spaces is that then they take away the essence of fellowship coming into the spaces. Then people simply rely on those digital connections. So there must be a constant balance to say, how do we balance the digital world and still make church meaningful, give essence to it, fellowship, the connection of the people, and people coming into spaces of worship. So I think one of the key things that we cannot shy away and pretend as if we are not in a digital space. However, we must find a balance in incorporating the digital tools into our spirituality. Thank you.
Enkosi kakhulu Mfundisi. Brother Xaba, are we done with the questions from our live stream?
Yes, for now we are.
Okay. There is a question in the chat box, Mfundisi. It reads as follows: greetings to you, brethren. I just want to check with the presenter if there is any distinction between evangelist and theologian. If yes, could you please elucidate the difference amid your in both African and South African context? And then there's another one that says, good evening to the meeting at large. Thank you for such a thought-provoking session. Our church is still stagnant with regards to spiritual transformations. Our parents are stuck in the traditional way of worship and are not willing to make room for new or blended spiritual transformation. I totally support the idea set dialogue, but how do we go about introducing something new to traditional worship? And then the last one says, would it be possible to get a few young people with some theologian training to rewrite the liturgy to be more contemporary to our current context in South Africa? The focus should be on multilingual, also to find some musicians to contemporize hymns. There are groups in England currently that take hymns and rewrite the music to more modern and singable tunes, also to adapt the wording to reflect current language. Mfundisi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mandiluve. I'm just trying to just check if I got the first question right. Was that seeking what is the difference between an evangelist and a minister?
And a theologian, sir.
A theologian. All right. I'm not too sure if I understand. I'm trying to contextualize in what I've said. It would have been much clearer if maybe we're talking about a difference between an evangelist and a minister of word and sacrament. An evangelist is one who whom by calling they are in the order of evangelism, and it is a ministry of word and service there. So usually they don't perform sacraments such as baptism and Holy Communion in our church. So the primary focus is on proclaiming the word and service. That is it as roughly as I can put it. However, the yearbook has prescripts around those. A theologian is someone who's not necessarily a minister of word and sacrament. It could be anyone, even yourself, Mandiluve, you could be a theologian, a layperson who studies theology at any institution with an interest of doing whatever with that. You become a scholar within theology. So those are the differences. You don't necessarily become active in any of the ministries, but it becomes your area of education and the area of expertise. And I hope I've managed to answer that question, although I could be wrong in terms of the context it is asked.
Mfundisi, are you done?
Yes, I am done.
Oh, okay. There was two more questions, or should I let
chat box?
Pardon?
Are those questions the ones in the chat box?
Yes, Mfundisi.
Okay, I'll open it as tag.
Let me just allow Brother Matlase, who has raised his hand, to ask his question while you still go through the ones that are in the check box.
Right.
Thank you, Nopal. Mfundisi, there are words here that says, I don't remember who says them. It says, nobody who wants to take religion in South Africa seriously can afford to ignore the traditional religions of Africa. And I note the word religion because Christianity is in fact a religion. So I want to understand now, how does our Africanness come into context, noting the way in which Christianity is a monotheistic religion and so forth? And also my second question is, does decolonization serve as a threat to the evolution of Christian theology and Christian spirituality?
Thank you, Mahlatsi, for that. One, if you listened to earlier on when I mentioned just lightly the thoughts of African scholars with regarding to decolonial thoughts, is that it becomes one of the most persuasive ways of making sense of Christianity within our African context. However, here it is not even what Ndlovu Gacheni suggests here is that it is not even a threat, because it is theoretical in a sense that even those who claim to be decolonial scholars, it is just theoretical stance that do not push the realities of the people. And so if even in a church, we become a wave of decolonial scholars. Maybe I've just done just a single module, and all of a sudden I define myself as a decolonial scholar without having gone into depth. Then becomes the challenge to say, we are not schooled enough in these areas, because we are not intentional. And therefore, the little that we have does not change the status quo. Hence, we will make noise about how this thing shows signs of colonialism and Eurocentrism, and yet we are not contributing anything to how we feel about it. And so, hence, my submission is that we need a wave of thinkers. We need a wave of scholars within the Methodist Church that can offer these thoughts and contribute as the way of driving towards us realizing that, in fact, Christianity can be and can have an African sense to it by what we contribute to it without waiting for any Western scholars. I hope I've answered that.
Yes, Mfundisi, you have answered, but I just want to do a follow-up question, if that's fine.
All right.
I think, I don't know whether I should say follow-up, but it's fine. I just said follow-up. The reason why I said something about decolonization and what is this? It imposing a threat to Christianity as it evolves. It's because I love the fact of how you went back into history, but I wished you could have went a bit further down the line of history so that we can even understand how Christianity was then introduced, right? And in understanding the introduction of Christianity, we may be able to penetrate the way in which we interpret it today and the way in which it has evolved. Because when something evolves, it started as something that is small, and then you see how it grows and everything. So that's why I wish you could have taken it back into the past. But I just want to ask, what's that question? Oh, yes. What is this? How does African spirituality and African theology come into context when we play into evolving? What is this? When you come into our worship and all of that? And yeah, I hope you understand.
Thank you very much. You are quite fair to say that you wish I could have gone more in depth. Like I said to you, it is such a broad topic. One of our lecturers would argue to me to say that there's no such thing as African spirituality. Because this thing is a Western thought, and that on its own will require us to have a terminal. And I think if the coordinator is listening well with the team, is that we need to get into that space where we distinguish what is spirituality in the African context. There are people here in this space I am seeing, which I want them to assist us in thought about how do we define African spirituality. I'm seeing a couple of names there. Is there anyone who wants to jump in there for me? I'm seeing Tony Libele from SMMS. I'm seeing Pel Tonono from UKZN. Would you assist me, friends, in trying to break down this question by our friend here?
Hi. Sorry, go for it. No, I was going to ask for the question to be rephrased, just so that one has clarity. I got a bit lost in the conversation. Thank you.
Kel, your thoughts?
Good evening, everybody. The conversation in terms of what African spirituality is, this is where we are, right? Have been following the conversation. The reason why, for example, your lecturer would have said there is nothing such as African spirituality is because discourse often on African spirituality, African religion, African theological notions is that the African is an intrinsically spiritual being. And therefore, to coin a concept that says African spirituality is to separate Africanness and use spirituality as an adjective to something that they do rather than to something that they are. So the conversation in terms of what thing defines African spirituality becomes different. At the beginning of the presentation, Reverend Masiza also spoke about how to Africans, the expression of what is spiritual or what is defined relationship or connection includes the physical and the metaphysical. And so those lead then to a notion of religiosity and or expression of spirituality using matter and non-matter. So if one wanted to get to the crux of what African spirituality would be, it would be an embodiment, it would be an enactment, and it would be an expression of being by an African in relation to the divine. I know that sounds airy-fairy, but that's the best crystallization of the idea I can get in as far as defining what African spirituality would be. And so when we look at what African spirituality becomes then in the Christian religion, which is a religion we have inherited, then we ask ourselves, how does the African engage and express their being, their engagement, their interaction with the divine in the religion of Christianity? And then, of course, we will ask ourselves about the rituals of Christianity, the rites of Christianity, and where the embodiment of the African being finds itself placed or manifested. And then, of course, sorry, I'm going to jump at a question I was not asked to contribute to. When we ask ourselves about decoloniality and Christianity, we also ask ourselves, which school of decoloniality are we referring to? Because decolonial responses to Christianity as a colonial inception are varied. There are those, of course, that are dismissive of it because of the suspicion with which it comes and because of its contribution to the subjugation of Blackness. And then, though, there are those who say unpack it, rephrase it, deconstruct to reconstruct, who are less dismissive of what Christianity can look like for the African person today. Reverend Masiza, those are my 2 cents. Well, thank you. Soni, go for it.
Thank you very much, Pearl.
Sure, Paul. I think it's pretty much, you've really covered a lot of it. But I think simply put, it's what also Biko complains about. There's a beautiful conversation that simplifies it, Biko and Father Stamps, where Biko says, in Africa, everything encompasses spirituality. There is not a dichotomy. There is no particular space where we do church, where we worship. And so everything that we do, so from a simple thing as a wedding, that's already on its own in an African context is something that already encompasses spirituality. And so there isn't that, and this is really informed by one of the principles, or rather factors, that inform African ways of life being holism. Holism basically suggests that there's no dichotomy between how we do life. The physical, the spiritual, the emotional, all forms part of one. And so, for instance, scholars such as Morove would make an example with saying when you go to an African spiritual practitioner, in that particular space, they consider your medical wellness, your spiritual wellness, your physical wellness, your emotional wellness. So there isn't that separation. And so that's why then some would then go on to complain and say, whenever we try to equate Christianity with African spirituality, we do not do justice to African spirituality. And I suppose this is why then you find that on the issue of decoloniality, again, you find that one of the things we deeply need to wrestle with as a church, even in wrestling with the question of decolonization, is how then do we even learn from what is called Amabandla Womoya, as an example, that are able to create a space that engages the holistic person and does not necessarily isolate their physical, their assumed spiritual needs, and isolate them from their physical, from their emotional and mental needs. Because when you go, for instance, one of the reasons, you find that we've got what we call Methodist by day and Apostolic by night is because in these particular spaces, we learn from research that the entire person is seen, and that's because in African spirituality, everything is included. There is no dichotomy, there is no separation. And that's, just some short thoughts in addition to what Paul had already contributed. Thanks.
Thank you very much to Pearl and Soni. And I hope then you get a sense, friends, from these thoughts and submissions, as I said to you, that it is through such conversations and spaces that we are able to realize what we want. And as I said to you, that the coordinator has been naughty with this topic, that it is quite a very intense topic, that we can never speak about Christianity as just as a Western thought. These things will always be pop-ups, and it requires more and more conversation. Over to you, Mandiluve.
Thank you so much, Mfundisi. Some of the questions that were in the chat box was a question from Nombulelo Sibukwana. They were asking that our church is still stagnant with regards to spiritual transformations. Our parents are still stuck in the traditional way of worship and are not willing to make room for new or blended spiritual transformation. I totally support the idea of having open dialogues, but how do we go about introducing something new to traditional worship?
All right. You see, with the church is often, and this I say this with careful consideration. The church is always putting its ear down to listen to what the people are saying, and through its various platforms. For instance, we've got JUCOM in the church. That body will then sit and craft ways of bringing about conversation. And in this sense, we are talking about new thoughts and new concepts. Then the church would say people should write papers. The church would send conversations to quarterly meetings, to organizational spaces. So to hear what is this noise, I will call it noise for lack of a better term, to say what are the people saying, and what are the people saying Wanzimakwe, what are the people saying in Pietermaritzburg, to allow us to express these things. But you see now, the problem here is, particularly with this conversation brought in this platform, is that young people are always found to be AWOL when it comes to opportunities of conversation. We found it in our leaders' meetings. Do we submit in our spaces of organizations when we are asked to then, what were your thoughts? What were your deliberations? And I know that there are spaces who submit these things, but I don't want us to assume that the church does not give us space. The church actually has moments of listening. Maybe sometimes it does not do anything with the responses, but the church offers space for its people to voice out these things. There's another question there, Mandiluve. I'm not sure whether it's a question. It was Reverend Health. Would it be possible to get a few young people with some theological training to rewrite the liturgy to be more contemporary to current context in South Africa? I believe that is work in progress in the church, Reverend Health. I'm not sure if the people who are doing this business necessarily have undergone theological training, but I can be sure that there are majority of them have not just theological training. Others have skills in writing, others in hymnology. So I believe is quite a number of well-skilled people who are doing that. It is work in progress in the church. Over to you, Mandiluve.
And Nkosi Mfundisi, let me just read one more from the chat box before we get questions from Facebook. It says, do we do enough to prevent unnecessary breakaways from the MCSA, seeing that we have so many denominations on account of spiritual practices? People quit our church for both charismatic churches and other denominations that believe and practice our doctrine. You mentioned this factor, succinct, and I am of the view that we need to include and impress it in our confirmation syllabus. Over to you, Mfundisi.
That's a good question. Do we do enough? I think we should allow the people to answer that question. I might be biased in answering that? Do we do enough as the church to ensure unnecessary breakaways where people just go to other denominations? Can we maybe just allow people to voice out in answering that question? Do we really do enough? Are there any takers who would want to?
There's a hand from Brother Klaba. Over to you, Brother Klaba.
Thank you, Rev Masiza and Umandiluv. I feel that we do, and I've seen. I was not there in modern breakaways like your Kimek and all that. However, I feel that we do, and I think it is us embracing the current context of who we are and embracing social justice post the apartheid era, that you'd find these unnecessary breakaways. Point in question, the most recent breakaway was in the Eswatini district, where those who broke away from the church felt that the church is embracing homosexuality and etc., and it is becoming immoral. Yet I had personally felt that the church was moving more towards being socially just, as how Jesus had envisioned the church to be. So I feel that we do enough to prevent unnecessary breakaways, in a sense of embracing who we are, embracing the fact that we are different yet we are one, because there is that common love that draws us together, and that is the love of Jesus. However, the love of Jesus is different, because I had said in my prayer, God reveals God's self in different ways. How God reveals God's self to me would be different to how God reveals God's self to the other person. However, I think the central theme of God's love is social justice, and that is presented in the cross, where the cross symbolizes a reconciliation between God and humans, and or reconciliation between God and creation, and also symbolizes a reconciliation between creation itself. So I feel that those who then often break away from the MCSA are people who feel hard pressed when we confront issues of injustices. However, I think because of also our traditional way or conventionality when it comes to worship, we have not really embraced or given space to those who are of a different spirituality than the traditional Methodist spirituality. And case in point, it is how we have been having conversations around ukuthwasa, and we have sort of reduced our African spirituality to an African practice. That is like reducing Christianity to the ministry of word and sacrament. We can't reduce Christianity to bufundis, and so I think it is those type of questions and conversations where we do not really do a thorough research, but we become reactive, then that we are not also then do enough in preventing unnecessary breakaways. So I think it is then important that when we have these conversations, we do that with an open mind. and try to move away from our conventionality. So we do enough in certain spaces, but we also don't do enough in certain spaces. And that is my 2 cents worth, Masiza.
Thank you very much, Ayanda. Mandy?
Enkosi kakhulu Mfundisi. Brother Xaba, may you please take just 3 questions from Facebook if there's any. Sivale.
Okay, thank you so much. The first question is from Onele, who is asking, how do we safely enable transformative worship models without losing the culture, feel, and look of a church? She's asking this with the background of church people participating in social media challenges that do not have the look and feel of Christianity. I think I'll also then jump in with the second question from Uluvo, who's asking, how can Methodists integrate African spirituality into their faith to transform the church while remaining true to their Christian beliefs?
Is that on?
Those are the 2 questions. I think the other one was just, there's the last one. How do we convert ministers who are steadfast on old ways? Was any proposed change, or how do we convert ministers who are steadfast on old ways that any proposed change is not supported or embraced? Even members of the church frown when choruses are sang. They will ask you which hymn is that one. How do we manage and embrace the changes?
Right. One, I think looking at the future of the church, there's a continuing need for openness to cultural expression. You can tell that the people are longing for that, and there should then also be, and I believe there is, the willingness to kind of listen to the people and craft a way forward, which sometimes our conversations are left hanging for a very long time, or we hop and change into conversations. And I think with the intent here is to find a way of following through our conversations as people who are called Methodists. Be intentional about following through our conversation. That is a personal view, which I think could be one of the fundamental things that assist us, even with our resolutions. Our resolutions, in most cases, are very good resolutions in the Methodist Church. We come back from conference and hardly we follow through these things. And that could be one of the things that could assist us to become intentional about following through the things that we discuss about and we envision as the church. Another thing is the extent in which we stay rooted in the core tenets of our faith becomes the business of those bodies that I'd mentioned about, because then we end up chop and changing at any point. We should put our trust into those bodies that do the tasks of thinking about these things theologically, applying their mind into saying, how does this affect the church in Southern Africa in this year? So another thing is that we allow those spaces, we entrust the work to the relevant people in doing that. What is the second question, Ayanda? I'm sorry, I did not get that down.
how can Methodists integrate African spirituality into their faith to transform the church while remaining true to their Christian beliefs?
All right. Now, that is an interesting conversation. I am longing also to hear, looking at the stance that have been taken throughout history, how do Africans influence their Africanness into one of the things that I feel that it is a challenge with us as African people is that the capturing of our African narratives. Our stories just end in the air. There's a serious challenge. We can barely trace our indigenous knowledge, our African archival information. It can barely be traced. I mean, I was having this conversation with one of the esteemed members and professors in the church to say, I recently went to Rhodes University to check the archives there, and to really recognize that there is one person who is Methodist, very aged, who is really passionate about those archives. And if she were to pass away, there wouldn't be anyone who is founded in assisting that. And that becomes one of the key problems. As African people, we don't invest in the capturing of our knowledge. As a result, even conversation, it becomes conversation of today, and the next day it is not there. The extent in which we broaden our knowledge as Africans, it is not intentional. Our institution, speaking into this, is the crafting of curriculums in our institution, speaking to these conversations. As we have been dialoguing, I'll make a typical example, as we have been in dialogue about uThwasa as the MCSA, has the Methodist seminary afforded us anything beyond that, within its curriculum, within its work, and within its products? And so I think that becomes really the importance of the intellectual space, and also recognizing that the people, even those that we regard as uneducated, can assist us in this business. And hence I spoke about research earlier on, that where are the people who then go to the grassroots, the people who go question and find out, people who have conversations, because the orality of African people, the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge of people is very rich there at the grassroots. So I think those two areas for me, capturing of our narratives, the archives, and also being intentional about research, then we could probably do a lot of work in making sense of this beast called African spirituality in inverted commas.
Then the last one, Rev Masiza, from the 3 questions. And thank you for capturing the issue of research. I think it has been my outcry for quite a while now within the church. The last question is from Onel, who's asking that how do we then safely enable transformative worship models without losing the culture and feel and look of the church? And I think she's asking that with the background of our church people participating in social media challenges that do not have the look and feel of Christianity. Case in point, you find people doing Utwalabam challenge in their uniform. So I think she's asking that from that context.
All right. Do any of the colleagues want to assist me with that? I'm trying to digest the question. It is quite a very serious question, where a church, the world influences the church, the world influences the church more than the church influences the world. Could I be right, Onele, with that kind of phrasing, that you would see everything that happens in the world being easily captured and happening into the space of the church? And perhaps we would be quick here. Maybe the presiding bishop is going to offer us thoughts, as I'm seeing the theme, the alternative community. But I just want to give to the colleagues to give me their thoughts. That one is really a serious one. Do any of the colleagues want to give thoughts? Reverend Held? Reverend Kuku?
Thank you so much. If we remember when you started, you made mention giving us the history of the church, and it is evident that throughout the existence of the church, it has never been stagnant. It has always evolved with times. And so those who have been engaged in being and doing church throughout the history of the church, I think they were good at reading the signs of times and responding to the signs of times in being missional and responding to the church. Even the approaches to worship have never been stagnant throughout the existence of the church. They've always evolved. But when you notice currently now, there are other factors like digital technology that have contributed immensely to not only digital technology, issues of internet and all of that. They help people to have wider understanding and knowledge and be broadened and widened to see what is happening in other spaces. For example, when I grew up in the context I come from, I did not have access to social media to see how things are done in other communities. I knew what is happening here in Emetele, how we worship Emetele, and the approaches that we were socialized with as we worship God. So for me, any form of change, it is prone to resistance. It cannot be easily received. There will always be resistance to any form of change that is being introduced. So change, even outside the church, anywhere, because change, it always threatens those who are comfortable with the status quo. So changing the culture of our worship will not be easy. It will be very difficult. You will have some resistance, especially for those who are beneficiaries on the traditions. At the same time, when we talk about our foundations and essence, that we do not lose them as we seek to contextualize. You are right when you say that, Onele. For example, our theological beliefs, we should not change them as we seek to theological beliefs and convictions. We believe in universal love of God, but the moment we will be writing hymns, choruses that speaks about predestination and exclusive love, then we are changing who we are and what we believe and exist for. So therefore, we should be careful of the change should not change our missional identity, but the change should be something that helps us to drive and be able to give expression to our faith in our context and in our time. So the issue, for example, of drums, introducing of drums, there was so much resistance to it. But now everyone now has welcomed and embraced it. Even the issue of Abo Pampa, Mimpempe, beats and all of that, it was not easy to introduce those things. And so as time evolves, I think what we need to do now, it is to be intentional about our discipleship programs. If every local community circuit can be intentional in discipleship programs, meaning that there are Bible studies, there are teaching services, there are preaching services, class meetings are revitalized and revived with focus topics on different focus areas, on worship and mission and all of that, we will be able now to embrace the change that we're coming with. And so those who have been set aside for and trained by the church and set aside and not through ordination, their responsibility is to safeguard our doctrinal beliefs and practices. But sometimes you see even them, they contradict our church beliefs and doctrines and ethos. So we must make sure that in safeguarding our doctrines and ethos, we don't stifle change and transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cook. I think that is a mouthful. It's quite a very broad question that requires careful consideration, as you've mentioned all these areas. And I hope that has answered Onela's question. Thank you very much. Mandiluve?
Thank you so much, Mfundisi, for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us today. Would you like to say any few words, closing remarks, before Sivale? Any thoughts or words of encouragement that you would like to leave with us, Mfundisi?
Oh, all right. Well, I just wish to appreciate these spaces. John Wesley would be very impressed with us. These are what would typically really happen in the class, where we talk about the life of the church. We reflect and we become accountable on who we are and how we express our Christian living on day-to-day basis. And so I really commend the MCYU at the connectional level, and I do note many others at district and circuit and society level that continue with these conversations for allowing young people to express their thoughts. And I do want to say that the church is calling us towards an awakening conference throughout the year 2024. We've been called to awaken, and it is through these conversations that we awaken ourselves as African Christians. We awaken ourselves as young people, noting the realities of our times, the excitement of our times, and how we make sense of our relationship with God ultimately beyond all these things. And the evolution of Christian worship within the Methodist Church is a rich tapestry, which is woven in tradition, in culture, and in theology. And so this is a story of transformation, meaning that even though we can hold on to some of those things, it is a transformation that we need to embrace. It is a transformation that should not only transform the spaces we are in, but transform our hearts, transform our minds as we seek to make our worship a very fruitful one in expression of our faith in Christ. And so with those words, I do want to say thank you for this challenging conversation. I've really enjoyed, and I would really want to see more of this. Thank you, Mandiluve.
Enkosi kakhulu Mfundisi. I would like to kindly request Brother Tolwane to please kindly give us a vote of thanks.
Is it Sister Tulwana?
Good evening, everyone. Yes, it's Sister Tulwana. I've been struggling the whole day. Nenteke practice as to how do I address you as Reverend Masiza and not Brother Masiza. And it has been a very interesting journey. I'd like to thank you for the time you took to prepare for this conversation. It has been very intriguing. When you speak about the best way of eating an elephant, I think this is what we did today. You cut it nicely into small pieces for us to digest. I, for one, have taken and learned a lot. There's a lot that I need to still chew and digest on. And as we're going through this conversation, I just went down memory lane as when we introduced contemporary worship, Go Central. I remember it was at Pimville, and people were very skeptical about it, as Rev Kuku just mentioned now now we see the usage of drums and whistles within the church. The one day my younger sister asked me, can I do that? And I said to her, no, why not? If it's not offensive to anyone, why not? And to date, she carries that as a trademark within the church or within the circuit. This conversation has been very, very interesting, and I feel that we didn't do much justice to it because of the time. However, I thank you for all the little seeds that you planted in our heads to ask ourselves, are we ready for this? Are we ready for a congregation that will wear sunglasses within the church? Are we ready for people to be comfortable? As much as we want to keep the young people amongst us, but are we ready for the changes that they're going to bring in our midst? I'd also like to thank Brother Mandiluve. I had to practice with the hymn, Mandiluve Fefelako, so that I don't forget the name. I'd like to thank you for the job that you have done. That was very, very nice for us. That was well done. Thank you for everyone that has attended. Like I always say to people, that you will never ever get another 10th of September 2014 at 1944 ever again. So the way you spend your time is very precious. We thank you for every minute that you spent with us. Thank you for the knowledge shared. Thank you for the contributions that the people made also on Facebook. But I think this somehow led to another conversation that maybe we as the executive never thought of during this month. But for me, this is another conversation that is similar to Ukutwasa. You can never exhaust it. We can never finish it. But I'd like to thank you, Brother Masiza, Rev Masiza, for the work done and the way you engaged everyone else that is here in our midst to say, I am not comfortable with me just responding on this one alone, but can so-and-so assist? Is there anyone in the house comfortable to assist? It really, really was a very interesting session that we had and very fruitful one at that. But I hope and pray that as we leave the session, we are going to continue with the conversations. Mo nkileng teng ngwaneso ka ga Modimo a ka o ekeletsa, o ska kgathala, o ska fela matla, o ska tena. Le ka hosane ha go bitsa re le batjha, o re hopole. You have always been a part of us, and we thank you. We look up to reverends like you, ministers like you, who have been in our midst and always continue to be in our midst and continue to teach us. I thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Brother Mandiluve.
Thank you so much, Sister Tulwane. Humblest apologies to sabotage nobody. I would kindly like to request the coordinator, Mfonso Kuku, to please close our session with a prayer and give us benediction.
Thank you so much. Let us pray. Lord God, we come before you tonight. We give thanks for these opportunities to be able to be in a space to learn so that we may deepen our faith, Lord God. We understand, Lord God, our pathway towards our spiritual growth. It is through these learnings. We pray for teachable spirit, Lord God. Help us, Lord God, to unlearn some of the things that we have done. Some of those things, Lord God, are not helping us to grow and deepen our faith, Lord God. Help us to unlearn so that we may learn new things, Lord God. Dismantle in us those areas that are holding us back from growing spiritually. We pray, Lord God, for your all-embracing and your all-welcoming and all-inclusive love, Lord God, to enfold us, Lord God, and be with us at all times and all places. And so bless us as we part ways. We pray this prayer through faith in Jesus Christ. Amen.